Hey everyone, welcome back to Fandom Through the Ages. I know it's been quite a while since the I Am Not a Hero video went up, and even that had a bit too long of a leg for my tastes between that and my cross-playing video. But today, we're actually going to get back down to what I originally intended this channel to be, which is mythology and stories of myth. Pay no attention to my hair, it won't stay down. It's kind of one of those days. I'm trying a different software for recording, so hopefully this will go better. Although I don't have too many complaints about the previous software either. So over a month and a half ago, I checked out this book from the library. And I've been slowly working my way through it, trying to find the perfect myth to bring up for this channel. And in the end, really, what I found has been really interesting. There's a lot of Japanese myth that essentially you could consider a history book again. It's fairly similar to Roman myth in that respect. That which isn't from Buddhism or Taoism and is imported from China, the local Shinto, which took its name only after the appearance of Buddhism. Before that, it was the only religion around, so nobody really had a name for it. But Shinto mythology is full of mythological features, including the creation of the world and how this animal came to be, how Yamamoto, came to be, and all these kinds of things. But on the other hand, you also have the stories of the 47 Ronin and Tokugawa, as major mythological figures, even though we know for a fact that the 47 Ronin exist, and if I remember correctly, we know exactly where almost all of their graves are. So historically we know they exist. You get a lot of that again, which is similar to Roman mythology, which has been interesting. It's also made it really hard because you get people who change their names about 6 different times, or the same character comes in but as a different character, or gods appear and all of a sudden they have brothers and sisters that you hadn't really noticed before, which is awesome really to me, because it's a matter of me tracing historical and mythological lines that are wee, but it makes it a little hard because the Eastern religion doesn't care quite so much. So we're going to do a myth a little out of season for the time of year, but not terribly out of season. We're going to be talking about Benten, the bringer of happiness, who is the only female goddess of luck in the Shinto pantheon. Although again, it's one of those things where the pantheon is a little too ritualized of a saying for them. However, she is the goddess of the sea, and also the patron goddess of literature and music. But for some reason, she's also been given credit for romance and wealth, as in a giver of them to those who properly worship her. So we're going to be talking about a myth that I found in the back of the book here that really was too cute not to tell. Even though it doesn't really seem to fit the archetypes or anything that I was hoping to tell, like I did with the Roman mythology. But that being said, it's going to be fun. So this adorable story is reported to take place in 1701, which would be right around just before the time of the 47 Ronin beginning to make their name for themselves. And it occurs in Kyoto. Our hero, so to speak, is a young man, a young scholar named Baishu, who happens to one day on his walk to work notice a brand new pool that had been built alongside the spring that he was used to drinking water at. That was just a rest stop for him. And he also noticed a new temple that had kind of just been built recently, dedicated to Benten, and a plaque along the spring that was titled Birthwater. And as he was marveling at the fact that either he hadn't noticed this, or all of a sudden these things had appeared relatively overnight, a scrap of paper kind of fluttered through the air and settled in front of him, and on it was a love poem written in beautiful female, obvious, calligraphy, and it was a poem that he was quite familiar with. So, being a young, educated man, he took the paper home with him, and studied it, learning the ins and outs of how the calligraphy was written, given that calligraphy is almost as much a painting science as it is writing science. Most calligraphers have their own unique kind of signature. He, in an interesting turn, found the calligraphy. Through the calligraphy, he decided that whoever the woman was who had written this was not only very skilled and accomplished, but also wonderful, and he decided that he would find out who she was, and he would marry her. As he had found this beautiful calligraphy poem at Benton's temple, he returned to the same temple and prayed for her guidance in the matter, and vowed to return every day for a week, as well as hold a nightly vigil on the seventh day, as a sign of his dedication and as a way to supplicate the god into helping him. Now, whether Benten was pleased or had this plan all along, as it stood, near the end of his night-long vigil on the seventh day, he was interrupted by an old man and younger man who said that his help had been requested, to help bring about a union that had been prayed for so devoutly. Silent, the old man took out a red cord and tied it around Baishu, and put the other end in the flame of the temple lantern, and when it was burning, he circled in the air. He had not even finished doing this when a young woman came into the temple, with her holding her fan up, and sat beside Baishu. Now, despite the fan being up, he could tell she was very beautiful. And the young man spoke then directly to Baishu, telling him that his prayer had been answered, and this woman next to him was to be his wife, and the writer of the poem that he had found. Then both the men, as well as the woman, vanished, and Baishu was alone in the temple, and daylight had come. There's no deliberate description of these spirits, angels, what you call them, who had come to help them. The fact that they were not serpents, and thus not directly tied to the kingdom of the sea, is an interesting thing of note. Baishu, obviously surprised and not off-put, but somewhat perplexed by this meeting, left the temple and was walking home. And as he was walking home, he ran into a girl he immediately recognized as the woman who had been in the temple with him the night before. He immediately approached her and started talking to her, and she did not seem surprised or concerned that some random, we'll assume smartly dressed and handsome, but nonetheless random stranger, had approached her on the street and started talking to her. And they had a perfectly normal conversation as they walked slowly toward Baishu's house. And as they approached the gate of his house, the young woman announced that Baishu had already made her his wife. And Baishu, seeing the obvious beauty and having had this other naturally experience with her previously, didn't really need any convincing. And so they spent some months living together as husband and wife. Interestingly, though, none of Baishu's neighbors seemed to have noticed that all of a sudden he had a wife and he was living life as a married man. It was almost as if she was invisible, but to him it didn't matter. He delighted in her intelligence and artistic accomplishment, and they were very well matched as people are. As this time progressed from autumn into winter, Baishu happened to have been wandering an area of Kyoto neighborhood, one can assume, that he did not really know, and was approached by a servant asking him to come talk to the master of the servant. Which Baishu, not knowing the servant or who this master was, still agreed to. Upon entering, he was rather surprised when the master of the house immediately announced him to be his future son-in-law. The master was nice enough to explain that in his anxiety about finding a good match for his only daughter, he had spread these poems at all of the temples of Benten. They had been copied by his daughter, in hopes of having the goddess intervene and help him, and that he had had a dream in which Benten had told him that a suitable match had been found, and then that the day before this meeting took place, he had had a second dream in which Benten described in minute detail Baishu and informed him that he would be passing by the house at a certain time and he should be called in. Now, before Baishu could explain that he was already happily married to a wonderful woman, the master of the household slid open the door to the next room, revealing none other than Baishu's wife of the past several months. They were married in body as well as soul very soon afterward, and were just as well suited in earthly form and earthly union as they had been in their soul wedding. For the girl, once again, never referenced the time they had spent together previously, and the story rounds out, they had, as we would say, lived happily ever after. And it's doubtless that Benten was testing Baishu to ensure that the daughter would have a proper, good match. There is, however, the question of what happened to her while her soul was living with Baishu, but we can kind of hand-wave it off. It's never really mentioned. I really like this story because it's kind of adorable, but also usually in a lot of mythologies you get the loved ones coming back to live with the ones they left behind, or you get there's another few stories in here like this where they're marrying spirits, they're marrying ghosts, and they're just like, that's normal, no big deal. But this is one of the few where you get a little bit of everything. You get divine intervention that vanishes. He runs into her in the street, realizes that it's the girl that he met last night and married last night, lives with her, and then meets her a third time and actually marries her in body and soul and lives happily ever after. interestingly enough, is it was a three-part story. The rule of three kind of holds true in here, which it doesn't hold true in a lot of Japanese mythology that I've noticed, which will be another video. I want to do a video on the rule of three. But I really like that story, and I hope you do too. And hopefully this editing doesn't take forever, and there's not too many ums and eye twitches and all sorts of things. But thank you guys for being patient. I apologize these take so long. Most of it is me being a lazy asshole. You can also check out my Tales of Life videos, which don't come out as weekly as I want them to, but come out more regularly than this, in which I describe why me not putting out videos is totally unexcusable, but it happens. Adios.